guys probably heard the news that Porsche is going back on their initial promise of the Cayman and Boxster only being EVs, and now they're saying that they're going to have an ICE version of each car at the higher GT and GT RS trims, which is awesome. But I don't think it's all good, and I want to explain why in this video. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme, and you'll know what I mean by that by the end of this video. Well, as everyone knows, governments, industries, regulations everywhere worldwide are pushing for cleaner energy to save the planet, climate change, all that stuff. I mean, the whole argument as to whether battery EVs, how much cleaner are they versus ICE, that is a topic for a separate video in the future, which we can cover. But that is why all these companies and the regulations are being pushed this way. And adoption hasn't been quite as enthusiastic as I think many people were expecting. There are infrastructure issues with regards to charging stations and reliability and availability. There are issues with battery degradation. People don't want to lose a lot of money with regards to their, depreciation, resale value on their fancy new EV. And it's not for a lack of performance. You ask Matej Rimac, the founder of Rimac Automobiles, making the world's most high-performance hypercars that happen to be EV, and it's not an issue of performance because these cars will outperform just about anything on the road, but they don't have that soul. You're not shifting your own gears, pushing your car to a red line. That craftsmanship, artistry, engineering, precision is different, right? Of course, you have very impressive engineering and technology in these hypercar EVs, but it's not quite the same as having an internal combustion engine that feels alive. It feels unlike anything EV. So the reason I say history doesn't quite repeat itself, but it does rhyme, is for two reasons. Number one, let's talk about mechanical watches. So in the 1970s, there was the Quartz Crisis, and that's where Quartz watches came on the scene. They were more accurate and technologically superior than mechanical watches. They didn't need an automatic movement or manual winding. They could last years on a single battery. They were more accurate, all that good stuff. And these luxury watchmakers, Rolex and such, had some marketing brilliance to say, you know what, we're going to reposition mechanical watches, which, by the way, prior to the Quartz Crisis were the norm. All watches were mechanical prior to that. But during the Quartz Crisis, they said, we're going to make these luxury items. So they're going to be less accurate. They are objectively inferior in many ways. But what we have that the Quartz watches don't is this artistry, this craftsmanship, this precision that makes them feel like art. Makes them feel alive, just like an internal combustion engine does versus EVs today. Quartz being the analogy to EVs, and mechanical watches being the equivalent to ICE. And it worked. Many of us, myself included, love our mechanical watches because of the heritage, the story, what they represent, the engineering marvel of having just mechanical gears and springs and this escapement create a timepiece that is relatively accurate. Still not nearly as accurate as a Quartz watch, and it will not last as long without, winding or having some mechanical input into it versus a Quartz watch, but we appreciate that. But the reason I say this is an issue is simply because what happened with luxury watches is probably what's going to happen with ICE sports cars, which is that it is going to be a luxury item, an aspirational purchase, and for those who have the means, which is not going to be everyone. Right now, just about anyone can get into a ICE enthusiast vehicle, regardless of budget. But in the future, I don't think that will be the case. In the same way that nowadays, mechanical watches, there are a few exceptions that are cheaper, but for the most part, especially if you want a mechanical chronograph, you're looking at over $1,000 for a watch. When I was first getting into watches, one of my first and one of my favorites was the Seiko SNDD87. A Quartz chronograph for $150. And I still love it, even today, even though now I have my MiataSpeed Master and Grand Seiko Shunbun, etc., etc. And it's not really the car manufacturer's fault, because the regulations are forcing this. Even Toyota and Mazda, creators of the GR86 and of course this Mazda Miata, driving this ND3, these are the affordable sports cars for the masses, for those of us who can't afford a Porsche 911 GT3. But even they are going to have issues being able to sell these cars at a lower price point, because there are various regulations and taxes and such that get imposed based on things like displacement or power, and that's today, especially in Europe. But in the future, it'll be greater fees and greater taxes and penalties on the car manufacturer for having ICE versus EV as well. And therefore, these companies simply won't be able to sell an affordable sports car without losing money. Therefore, similar to how the Quartz and mechanical watch story unfolded, with mechanical watches becoming luxury purchases for those who have the means, I think something similar is going to happen to the ICE sports car. You can also look to steam engines for another interesting example from the past. Steam engines were the dominant engine type from the late 1700s through the 1800s, but of course they were displaced by internal combustion engines and electric motors in the early 1900s. And nowadays you still will occasionally see a steam engine, but it's more like a historic perspective, you know, the context of a hobbyist or something that is nostalgic, not something that is used day to day as the best mode of locomotion, right? I think something similar will happen to ICE, because steam engines were only around for about a century and a half, and right now internal combustion engines have also only been around for about a century and a half. I do think that internal combustion engines are going to have a longer shelf life than steam engines, because I don't think that they're going to be displaced as quickly. We don't have as clean and as superior of an alternative. But maybe the shelf life is 200, 250, 300 years. Which is kind of wild to think about. I mean, if you or I were born in the 1800s, would we be like steam engine enthusiasts, train enthusiasts? Would we be obsessing over horses and like horse handling and power and stuff like that? I don't know. But in the grand scheme of things, this is just a small blip on the timeline. A century and a half of internal combustion engines, and even less than that of enthusiast vehicles. It puts things into perspective that, you know, the world is not ending. We're just transitioning, we're evolving, and hopefully things like synthetic fuels are going to keep the internal combustion engine alive. But who knows? Who knows what the future holds? And there are some counterpoints, right? You don't have to be an internal combustion engine vehicle enthusiast. You can be an EV enthusiast. Maybe the first ever Tesla Roadster will be looked at with nostalgia as like, wow, look back then, though, some of these earliest consumer EVs were so unique in whatever ways. Maybe people will think highly of them, right? The same way that we look at older vehicles which are flawed, which aren't as good objectively on paper, and we still have nostalgia for them. There's still some desirability for older 911s as an example. And there's so many parallels here, right? Like, again, Quartz being technically superior, EVs being technically superior in a lot of ways versus ICE. So sure, there may be some EV enthusiasts in the future, but I'm not so sure. I know a lot of you guys are like me, children of the 90s or shortly after that, and the 90s was the golden era of the Japanese sports car, which is why so many of us are JDM fans. And I think people even born after the 90s still look back and love cars from the 90s. Similar to how, even though right now I'm rocking an Apple Watch, you guys know that I also enjoy my mechanical watches. And even though I was born well after the Quartz Crisis, I still very much love the story of the Omega Speedmaster. This watch that was originally developed in motorsport, taken onto the moon, and such a cool watch that was saving lives, Apollo 13. And I think many younger enthusiasts in the future, let's say in 20, 30 years, most of the cars then that are sold new are going to be EVs. Well, I think many of them will look back to ICE vehicles and think the same thing that I think of old mechanical watches, right? So it is a bit of a mixed bag. I think the positive here is that, hey, at least we're getting ICE enthusiast cars. That's awesome. The unfortunate thing, though, is that it's going to be at the higher end. It's going to be for those who have the means. Most of us will not be able to. And even the used vehicles, right? If ICE are becoming more and more rare and you aren't going to be able to buy them, at least in the enthusiast form, then the used ICE enthusiast cars are going to become more desirable, and those prices are going to rise as well, right? This is not like tech gadgets where the newer thing is always better. Like with EVs, every new EV that comes out, you're getting better and better battery technology, better and better electric motors. It's like a phone that you're constantly upgrading. You're wanting the newest tech, the best tech. You upgrade, it's disposable. When it comes to an ICE sports car, the imperfections are part of the personality and the character. So you look at the engines back before they had fuel injection. You look at carburetors, right? And those engines were a headache, but also they had this unique charm and character to them. Even if a Tesla Model S is a lot faster than my little Miata, I would much rather row my own gears, have a vehicle that's lighter weight. Because it's not about just objective metrics, 0 to 60, NVH levels. It's about the emotionality, and that's why we get in 2 cars, in 2 driving, in 2 track days. But my friends, let me know what you think with a comment down below. Much love, and I'll see you all in the next one.